I couldn't be happier today that my guest is the one and only Steve Knightley. Please give a big show of hands for Steve. Welcome to today's show, and I couldn't be more delighted, so please give a big show of hands to Mr. Steve Knightley. Hi, Steve.
Tim, how long has it been since Port Merion, I'm wondering?
It's coming up to 10 years, so I thought it's time we saw each other face to face again. These decades are just flying by, but very memorable. A lovely night for me. I don't know about you. How do you remember it?
Very good. I keep promising my wife a trip to Port Merion, and Meireg, I'm sure Meireg would look after us, but that will happen. As my summer schedule is now non-existent, I have plenty of time to do socially distant tourism.
That does bring me to the first question. It's how's 2020 going for you so far? How's your bubble? And how are you coping in this extraordinary new world? Have you found anything out about yourself?
Yeah, I'm pretty good at sea change spotting. And I realized within a week that it was all over. A certain way of life I've led for 30 years has finished. And it's about building a new one. Luckily, I've got the material and the stories, and there seems to be enough people out there interested in basically what I've got, I think, to make a moderate living, certainly for, I suspect, another year and a half, maybe a year at the least. The idea that it's going to resume in September or October, I think is, I'm afraid to say. So I would rather tell myself I'm in a new way of life and be surprised by developments than be waiting for the diary to open up again, you know.
What you're saying seems a lot more sensible to me than anything I'm getting from the daily political mumbo jumbo. Would you send your children to school in September?
Yeah, I would. I think teachers have a duty of care, like doctors and nurses. And it's not the likes of me, middle class with streaming. It's all those kids in single rooms without contact, maybe single parent families. I think the damage that could be done to their prospects and I think it's the minimal risk of transmission is absolutely outweighs any considerations. And what if the nurses and the doctors and the care workers have said, I'm sorry, you know, I think, Tim, we were told there was this beast outside and don't go out. Now we're being told we think it's gone, so just go out and have a look around. But people are saying, no, I need you to tell me. And often it's those very people who didn't want to be told to stay indoors. And I want 100% assurance that the beast is gone. But no one knows. My wife's a doctor, and she says, there's things about this beast we don't know about. So go and have a look around. And if it looks a bit like there's something in the trees, maybe come in again. But we can't have 100% assurance. And I think particularly for kids, I got a 14-year-old, a 16-year-old, and an 18-year-old. They're missing out, mate. There's damage being done that I think may be generational. So they got to get back. They got to get back with their friends.
How are you coping as a family? I mean,
good. The first month it was like endless summer. I was doing lots of streaming concerts. People were being remarkably generous. The second month, the generosity declined as compassion fatigue set in. And then I had to start thinking of different strategies. I'm driving my wife mad. She's never had me at home for more than 2 weeks at a time since we've met. So we're having to adopt different strategies. I'm now baking bread and making yogurt and doing all that sort of stuff. The kids were easy to motivate for 6 weeks. Now it's getting tough. And I can see them disconnecting from school a bit. So yeah, it's 2 or 3 phases. I think we're in that third phase. The first phase, excitement, all new, lots of interest in the music. Second phase, build a different structure. And now the third phase is like, this is it for a while. And what's it going to look like in February or December? You know?
You were a teacher, were you not, once? And so have you been home teaching?
I'm crap at it, to be honest, Tim. I do my best. I mean, luckily they're at the age where you can show them what they're supposed to be doing and gradually monitoring them. If they'd have been 5, 7, and 11, I do not know how I would have coped, to be honest. But they're okay. I mean, my daughter was just about to do her GCSEs. That was all wiped clean. So she's either passed or she hasn't. But she's missing all the social stuff that was around the last term. She was off to Glastonbury. This was going to be her summer, you know. She was going to be on the road with us. She's going to be singing with me at a few festivals. So that's all suspended. And they're adapting pretty quickly, but I feel dreadfully sorry for them.
Speaking of 5, 7, and 11, when did music first enter your life? Can you remember going back that far?
We came from, I don't come from a folky family, but music was always two things in my family. High status was entertainment and sport. And we weren't an academic family by any stretch. I think I might be the first one to stay, to do my 11 plus and go to grammar school or whatever. But Frank Sinatra, Elvis Presley, the Beatles and Stones, they filled the house always.
Was that through you or through your parents? Or
I always had music on. And I remember looking at those early Sinatra albums, you know, the wee small hours of the morning, and seeing him in his trilby in like a Hopper painting, propping up the bar. That persona, that classic American persona of the wounded loner, you know, the poetic tough guy, very appealing. And I sort of wanted to be one of those when I grew up. And then moved a lot, went to about 7 different schools. So, you know, what strategies can you have for making friends? Sport, fooling around, entertainment. Picked up the guitar when I was 14, found a group of friends to play with, and then realized it gained the attention of all the 16-year-old Scandinavians that came to my little seaside town to learn English every summer. So I suddenly had a lot of motivation to play songs at beach parties and barbecues. And
what was that motivation initially that made you pick up a guitar rather than a trilby and look like Frank? Was there a particular band, singer?
Yeah, well, it was the freewheeling Bob Dylan. It was seeing all these guys that used to come to the West Country. They used to be on West Country TV every Friday night. Cliff Angier, Jerry Loughlin, Whiz Jones, Ralph McTell. They were sort of hanging around in Cornwall a lot. And this is the late 60s, early 70s. It was almost like their West Coast, their Kerouac thing, you know. And they would stop at the Deer Leap Folk Club when we were 14 and 15. So you had these guys who were only 10 years older, living this wonderful nomadic gypsy troubadour life, hearing Bob Dylan, you know, James Taylor, Cat Stevens and all that sort of stuff. And the people organising the folk clubs, again, were just straight out of university. They're only a few years older than us. So when you're 16 or 17, that's somewhere to hang out, stay up late, smoke weed and meet girls. It's a very heady cocktail for a young English guy who suddenly discovered he had these skills to enter that world, you know.
Before that, had your talents been recognised at school?
No, not at all.
No, not at all.
No. Music we did was it was learning the dots and the dashes, and I still can't read or write music. My talents as a performer were recognised by a couple of teachers for plays and stuff like that. But I don't remember playing at school till the 6th form common room when I was 16 and a half. And then we had a little local folk band. And we were out doing gigs in pubs playing to these older people. Well, I say older, but it's an odd thing now that the younger folkies are playing to people their grandparents' age. But we were playing to people only a few years younger. So it's... I'm not sure what I would have done if I'd have entered the folk scene today, whether I would have found that a fizzy enough environment to draw me in, you know.
Your early inspirations, you mentioned there, was quite a mix from Cat Stevens to Bob Dylan and so on. Can you see them in your work down the years?
It's funny because I can structure this reply because I built a one-man show upon my musical journey. It was hearing the freewheeling Bob Dylan album when I started to play acoustic guitar at 14 or 15. that persona, again, back to that American loner, that was attractive. Then it was going to the Sidmouth Folk Festival at 15 and hearing Martin Carthy and realizing that all of these American songs had British roots to them. This is my music as well. And then it was being immersed in the work of Ted Hughes from an encounter I had with him on a writing course. So if you put Bob Dylan, Martin Carthy, Ted Hughes in a big pot and add in a bit of Jethro Tull and David Bowie and all the rock stuff, and then Springsteen later on, hopefully you might see a few little elements in my stew.
That's fascinating, isn't it? And I have to say, don't you feel this is how school should be?
Yeah.
Putting all this in and seeing what comes out.
Yeah, and there was no pressure of any exams in any of this. There was no ticking boxes. I was self-motivated. I wasn't motivated academically, but I was certainly motivated to learn these skills. And especially when my friend Paul, who was a year older, got his car, and suddenly there was a folk club every night of the week in Devon, in East Devon, and not just folk, but this is universities, teachers training colleges. It was a scene to sort of want to stay up late and to get away from your parents, not to go to gigs with them. This was like, where are you going tonight? Oh, don't worry, mum, and wandering in the small hours, it was, for the right time in the right place, I think.
Is that scene still thriving today? Do you know?
No, some of the clubs are still being run by the same people, which is funny, but as regards, I suppose there's an open mic scene, and there is places where acoustic troubadours can play, but it's not as coherent or as vibrant in that sense. But the standard of playing amongst the younger musicians has never been higher. So it's where do they play, and particularly now, what happens now, it's maybe it's a chance to refresh the whole genre. Well, maybe these musicians an opportunity online to engage with people closer to their own generation, which I think is essential.
Yeah, there is a feeling we got to start over, and it's just how at this moment, but it could be interesting rather than horrendous.
You have to see these all, if they're inevitable, you may as well see it as an opportunity. You can't do anything about it. So you just have to do the best. So I'm waiting now for the dust to settle on the structure for the next year, because still people are thinking there may be a touring environment this autumn. And so I've stopped doing the prioritizing playing live streaming at the moment until maybe a month or two, when people go, this is the only place we can hear this music for a while. So obviously I have to try and figure out also a way of monetizing it. How do I get an income? Because it has totally stopped overnight on March the 16th, which was the last gig I did. That was it.
Did you, going back to the early days, did you have any ambitions outside of music? I mean, you mentioned that at school you were performing. Was that theatrically?
Well, no, there was the odd school play. No.
Did it come naturally to you? Because you certainly are the front man of Show of Hands.
The natural show off. I've got better at it, I must admit. I think I've only really cracked a lot of the stagecraft stuff in the last 10 years, but I've got better at it. And I always wanted to show off, but originally I wanted to be a Royal Marine.
Really?
I grew up with Royal Marines all around me. They were big, macho guys on the estate, the housing estate where I lived. My stepbrother was a Royal Green Jacket. My brother-in-law was a Royal Marine. This is when I was 14. So, but as I sort of got a bit older, then I wanted to be a teacher. But I only ever said that because it shut people up. They said, "Oh, what do you want to do?" And so I ended up doing an education certificate almost by default. I did a degree in politics and history, but then all my friends were having fun in Brighton, so I went there to do an education, a PGCE, and it seemed to buy time.
The Marines, I find hard to believe, mainly because of, the period you were growing up. I mean, it would have been the 60s. It was, the Marines didn't really get much of a look-in.
Well, at that time, of course, it was Northern Ireland which destroyed the career of my stepbrother. He couldn't take any more tours of service, and same with my brother-in-law. But before any peacekeeping element came into it, with the United Nations and that, I think they just found themselves looking at endless tours of Northern Ireland, and a lot of guys, it rather broke their spirit, I think.
Yeah. Pre-Phil coming into your life, how would you describe things? You're out there, you're on the road yourself, you're touring?
No, there's, at the age of 16 or 17 and 18, I was in a trio with a guy called Paul Downs, a local fiddler, and we were gigging locally, you know, 1 or 2 a month. Garwain, we were called. I failed all my A levels and all my friends buggered off. Phil was on the same scene that I was in, between the ages of 16 and 18 or 19. He was in a duo with a guy called Colin Wilson, and we met and we socialized and we hung out. Jackie Leaven was a big star down here, John St. Field as he was then. So there was a scene where we all used to congregate, people's houses. People were getting their first flats and their first bed sits. So my friend in my group teamed up with Phil, and they went off Downs and Beer, and they toured together very successfully for about 10, 12 years. I was left behind. I spent a year really mainly playing rugby. That was my social life, with the Rugby Club. That was totally consuming for a couple of years. And then I went off to Coventry, a year behind everybody else, to do the degree in politics and history. I started a folk club there in Coventry. Paul and Phil used to come and play. And once again, we had this social scene based around music. I didn't do a lot of academic work. I used to book people, I used to book friends to come and play at Coventry. That ticked over for about 3 years. And then I went off to Brighton to join all my mates. And I was on the Brighton scene, the Sussex scene, with Paul's brother on the double bass. He had a music shop. We did that for about 4 years. And then I was drawn to London and played rock and roll for about 8 years in sort of pubs and clubs.
So you were acting as your own agent, I guess?
Yeah, we used to
selling yourself.
Yeah, but again, it was a thriving scene. You're talking about the late 70s. There were some fantastic clubs all over the Sussex countryside, in Eastbourne and Seaford and Telham. You know, again, the generation had just moved into their early 30s, the organisers. But it was quite a vibrant scene. You know, I had a bit of money in my back pocket. I was.
Did you have a plan?
No, because when I started writing more and more in Brighton, there are a lot of people connected to the London scene. So I was told more and more by more and more persuasive people, look, you've got to form a band. You know, you've got to come up to London and do this. If you want to make a living, if you want to be a star, you know, you've got to play rock and roll. So I met this Australian guy who worked for EMI Music. We formed a band together, and we did that for, well, till I was about 32, really.
And then Phil.
Yeah. Phil at the time, he'd never stopped being a musician. He was playing with Paul. He then did some work with Mike Oldfield. He was then in the Albion band. And by the time all the bands I was in London folded or didn't get signed or, you know, broke up for various reasons, I was then 32. I thought I'd move back to the country, having failed as a musician, and trying to figure out what to do with the rest of my life. Just at the same time as Phil was coming to the end of his time with the Albion band. And he said, look, you've got all these songs. I know all the folk scene inside out. Why don't we do some gigs? And this was about late 80s. And we've been doing some gigs ever since.
What difference did that make to you and to him? The two of you coming together, and did it work instantly?
It did for various reasons. Looking back, I can understand the dynamic now. Phil has no agenda. If he hears a good song, he'll play it. It's not like, oh, I want to play my stuff now. I think he saw me as a source of material, and it gave him material to decorate, you know, on all of his instruments. And he's quite happy for me to generate the material, and he's more than content just to turn up and to do the decoration. And we never argue about the direction or the set list. It's not like I'm working with another songwriter with an agenda. And it's been like that ever since, you know. Phil, if I said to Phil, you know, can you play on another instrument? He goes, yeah, all right. He's not in, he's very strange in that he doesn't have an ego in the conventional sense.
That's astonishing, really. Few and far between, I think.
Yeah, utterly indifferent to reviews, to awards, to anything like that. He never badmouths other musicians. He never gossips. He just turns up and he plays. He doesn't particularly like rehearsing and arranging in detail, nor do I. You know, I chunk away with a song. He does something, it just works, and then we sort of fix it. And we don't need to talk to each other for hours on end. You know, it just sort of, yeah, in a funny way, it's like some sort of musical marriage that works really.
Well, it's a great description of him. How would he describe you, do you think?
I think he knows where my songs go musically. I think he would probably say that. I'd like to think he would say I'm one of the best songwriters to come out of the boom recently, and I generate material. We all look good in each other's company, if you see what I mean. You know, yeah, it sort of works, and interestingly, we probably may be doing a lot more work with just the two of us in the next year or so, simply because of the demands of the scene and logistics. And it's almost like people buy into this idea of these hairy blokes from Devon, one big guy with the dexterous fingers and one miserable looking bugger. It's almost like we're the cartoon versions of ourselves, and people seem to like the package. So well, that remains to be seen over the next few months, I think.
I want to see the comic book.
Yeah.
I do. I can see you both. You would fit very well. How different are those early Show of Hands days to today? Or it seems you're getting back to them.
I think we've production values have gone up and up and up. But essentially, our strategy is the same. You know, miserable songs and silly stories. We always set up the material. You know, it's been great playing with Miranda and with Cormac and supplementing the lineup. But we can go back to the duo format at any time, and people seem to enjoy that. Yeah, I suspect it's more or less the same ingredients. We've got better at what we do, and obviously the sound of stuff gets better, the production values get better, but it's essentially the same experience: melodic songs, narrative songs, you know, rooted in an English sort of sensibility with American instruments or world music instruments. You know, it's that's the ingredients in our particular recipe.
Yeah. Can we talk a little about the songwriting process that you go through?
Yeah.
And has that changed since you first thought, well, I'm going to do it as well?
No, I can look back on the body of material and look at the different strategies I've adopted and say, okay, this is how I do it. You know, occasionally it's a headline, you know, like AIG. I've just done a new version of the Bristol Slaver, which I think will get a lot of action. We're having that animated at the moment. As I say, there's issues-based songs like that. There's a song about English identity, you know, there's roots. There's the big storytelling stuff like Cousin Jack, you know, and Tall Ships. And there's the odd little love song, observational, you know, are we all right? Don't it feel good? Don't be a stranger, you know, a little everyday expression. So that tends to be the way I work. You know, it's either, as I say, an observational, a headline, or a mixture of all of those things. And I think that's what keeps it fresh, really.
It can be the closest to protest songs, some of your work, I think. Yeah. You know, and it's been surprising for me over the last 10, 20 maybe years that there haven't really been any protest singers popping up.
Shouty songs, you know, there's a few shouty songs, but you have to remember you're shouting to an audience that already agrees with you about almost everything. So you cannot do that for an entire night, otherwise you start eating yourself, you know. What was great about playing the village halls, as we did in the early days, you're playing to a country audience, either a working class or a landed gentry audience, and if you're singing songs about second homes to that audience, the working class rural going, yeah, right on, and the landed gentry are feeling guilty. But if you're known as only an issues-based writer, you never get to see people that don't agree with you, or you never get a chance for people to think, I never thought of that, you know. So that's why we never ally ourselves to any particular structure or movement or political party. It's not good as a writer to do that, I don't think.
No, I understand that. And perhaps Roots would be a good example of that, that's been misconstrued by people wanting to use it for their own.
Yeah, there was probably a fault in the writing there. But it's there was one line, I've lost St. George in the Union Jack, and is like the symbol of Englishness has been subsumed by a symbol of empire. That's what that meant. But I know people were singing, I've lost St. George and the Union Jack. In fact, when we were about to do the Celtic Connections, a local paper said, English duo to sing controversial anthem. And they actually quoted, said, we've lost St. George and the Union Jack. And I phoned the journalist. I said, that's a misquote. It's in. He said, it's just a word, isn't it? Just a word. And I thought, yeah, it's a very big word in that context, So, there was a structure in the song that allowed that interpretation. But generally speaking, the people who enjoyed that song the most were the Welsh and the Scots and the Irish, who said, yeah, good on you. It's good to hear people talking about Englishness without it being associated with a type of imperial sensibility.
Yeah, absolutely. Have you written your masterpiece?
Probably. I don't know. I mean, I've just finished a song called The Ride about a fairground owner who says to his son, listen, I'm going to have to put everything in the winter yards because there's no prospect of going out this summer. And he says, okay. He helps his dad put the bumper cars away and says, look, I'm going to work on my brother's farm for the winter, but maybe, look, next summer I'll come and get you. Let's drag all this stuff out again. And I think it's very poetic and quite moving to sing. So maybe that will be my masterpiece, but who knows?
It's a huge body of work now, going back over 30 years.
Yeah.
I feel a bit like Terry Jones in Monty Python when I say, what's that feel like?
Yeah.
How amazing is that?
Well, it's interesting, but we're going to get a chance to really get into it because as soon as we're able, we're going to perform every album in the order we recorded them in, as one-off shows. So with Bridport 92, we're going to do all of those songs and introduce them, and just Phil and I in a small studio, and we've got 18 albums, so we'll probably do one a month for as long as people want to hear them. And we'll have to relearn all of that stuff, which is great.
I'm intrigued. Once upon a time, nobody had heard of you. So how did you make it work? Because, boy, have you made it work. It's a strange kind of fame or celebrity that Show of Hands has. I can't think of any of the bands, really, that have your type of fame and celebrity, where you have a zillion fans. And yet you can still find somebody you'll say Show of Hands to, and they'll say, who's that?
Yeah, what's interesting is the people, is like, I know Tony Hall very well, the Director General of the BBC. He lived next door in Dorset. So I can speak to Tony, and he's a fan. I know people who are commanding officers of local regiments who are fans. I know people who are in medicine. I know people at, there's a guy, Chris Evans, not the DJ, but he's a leading biological entrepreneur. And they've stumbled across us in their world. And in a funny sort of way, there are these people, men and women, who have reached the top of their particular pyramid. And if they value music, they look across and they see me and Phil as being at the summit of ours and as fellow spirits. And that in the last 10 years, I never expected that. If they don't value music, you're invisible. But so it's now you're chatting to people who in their own fields are very formidable, who see us as like-minded, and it's quite nice, really. Only the other day I was talking to someone who's he's investing millions in a scheme of recycling energy in Portland. And I used to be the butcher where I lived in Dorset. And so our journeys have gone up like that. And people like Andrew Marr and Jeremy Vine and all these people, they are well aware of us and of what we do. And so we've got that sort of reputation with ever having had like the hit or the big media moment, I'm taught in schools, you know.
Mm.
People do my stuff in lessons, in history and geography lessons. And
Well, I should think so too. I mean, I do a lot of work in schools myself, and I could think of a few people in the music business that would have such effect on
yeah,
any number of subjects, on topics on the school curriculum. You
what
know.
we've never had is really the acclaim of the scene itself. We've always been regarded with the, not suspicion. Maybe they felt in the early days we were passing through the folk scene on our way to somewhere else, and maybe that's what we wanted to do. But you know, I can see, and this sounds a bit like sour grapes. I know folk award winners who sat at our feet from the age of 13 or 14, entranced, and who would never acknowledge us as being an influence. It
Huh.
would be an uncool thing in the world. I know some of them personally as well. And it's just one of those things, you know. We have empowered hundreds of people to put on shows by not charging a set fee, you know, by our way of working for only for a percentage. No one takes a risk, who use the profit that they make from us to book someone who won't step out the door until they get a guaranteed fee. So all of these promoters that are on stream, you know, all of these people that we've empowered, all of these musicians that we've taken on support acts, given opportunities for. And it's sort of a bit has gone by the by. You know, we are not the coolest people to reference as an influence, but it's just, it's one of those things, really. You know, I just accept that as as our lot. You know,
It's human nature, I suspect, and but sometimes sour grapes are called for.
well,
Um,
whatever. No one gets to feel cool by championing something that is thriving and doing well.
have you ever considered yourself to be cool? It's such a strange term, isn't it? No, exactly.
No, I don't like. I mean, cool is on the continuum to being cold and to being dead, isn't it? Really. So yeah, I mean, Miles Davis is cool. The folk scene is not really renowned for its coolness.
You mentioned there going out for a percentage rather than, I mean, that's an incredibly brave thing to do as a new band, although perhaps it's the only way to go as a new band. What do you think if you were a new band today, you're setting off on the road or attempting to find that road? Let's assume the road is open. Is that the way you go about it today as well? Just going on a percentage rather than a guarantee fee?
Well, in virus times, Tim, everything is off because the model that we built up now is now redundant.
I totally understand that.
Because we have a whole autumn tour in 700 or 800 seater venues premised upon no guarantee. And some of them have sold 30 tickets. Now we're contracted still to turn up and do that gig, but we can't do it economically. Whereas everybody over the years that, you know, I want this amount of money or I'm not turning up, they're sort of used to the venues booking them even if they're only half full because they're guaranteed a fee. So our business model is sort of become redundant now. So I don't quite know. There's a lot of hard conversations we have to have over the next few months with an awful lot of people. It's no good a village hall saying, look, Steve, we sold 30 tickets. Is that all right? Are you still coming? Because they're not contracted to pay me 600, 700, 800, whatever, 1,000, whatever it is. And I'm going to have to say, I can't. I'm sorry, you know. So it's all change. That's what I meant. A way of life genuinely has finished. But if I was to, if it wasn't like this, and the scene was as it is, I would say to new bands, invest in your presentation. Don't invest in another recording. Don't invest in another recording that no one's going to buy and won't change anything. Invest in your transport, invest in your sound, invest in your lights, because it's bums on seats that ultimately is a career. And CD sales they were almost non-existent anyway this year, but now I think they're vanishing off the planet.
You've spent most of your years over the last 10, 20 years, whatever, either as part of Show of Hands or going out just as Steve Knightley.
Yeah.
The difference between a Show of Hands song or show and a Steve Knightley song or show?
Well, often it's the same material and I get a chance to work a song in through playing live on my own. And often I develop some stories and some strategies, which when we get back together as Show of Hands, are just enhanced. So, but obviously I'm chattier. It's more anecdotal. It's a bit more confessional, the show. And for the last 5 years, I've tried to find a theme. I did a tour of only maritime songs. I did a tour of only my country and rural songs. I did a tour of my musical journey, referencing Dylan all the way up to Springsteen and all that. I did a day in the life tour, the one I've just finished. So I try and find a theme to a tour so that it's a proper show. And then that feeds into moments that Show of Hands can utilize. So it's been mutually reinforcing. And as a general rule, if Show of Hands is worth 600 in a town, I can get around 150. You can play to about a third of your core audience. That's a living. You can make a living from that, or you could.
As a writer, have you been pulled to write outside of songs, either TV scripts or books, an autobiography, perhaps that you could?
It sounds like name dropping, but Billy Bragg keeps telling me to write a book. He keeps telling me to put all my anecdotes into it, just to do it. And I haven't yet. I'm a bit lazy, but maybe that's something, because I've got a lot of stories and a lot of observations. So yeah, maybe that's something I might do over the next. How long is this going to be?
Yeah. Well, I mean, your style does seem, would work naturally for that. Yeah. I mean, people enjoy listening to you.
Yeah, I'm getting quite good at being a raconteur, I must admit. And the stories get polished and sort of edited, and they lock together with a certain song very well, which is why I've enjoyed doing my streaming shows, because I think some musicians have made a mistake during the lockdown. You can't do gigs at people anymore. I don't think you can be behind headphones and microphones. I think you need to be like this. You're sitting next to someone in their front room. And it's a complete reversal of the normal structure where people come in out of the darkness into your space. You're a dot on stage and they look around. You're entering their space. So it's like, excuse me, can I sit next to you and tell you a story and sing you a song? And I've quite enjoyed doing that. And I think that might be the way for a while now,
It's the ultimate intimate gig, isn't it, really?
It is, yeah, it is, very much so. And it helps if you have the anecdotes and the stories. And it's like, I remember that thing that happened, we did this, and anyway, here's a song. Rather than, I was in a bar in LA, and wow, and so, that particular way of performing, I'm not sure works in lockdown mode.
Yeah, well, I'm sure. I mean, there just must be so many stories. I mean, you mentioned Port Merion a while back, and I just thinking back on that, I think I could write a book on that one day alone.
Yeah, it was a great day.
So many little moments with yourself and Steve Harley there.
I've seen him a couple of times since then, and he is such a trooper. He really does the job. I've seen him a couple of times play, and yeah, I'm full of admiration for Steve. He just does it. He just does not let the audience escape.
He certainly takes the roof off with his pension, as he calls it. Come up and see me. But yes, it was a delight, and I seem to remember that the most delightful moment was after the gig. It was about midnight, and just sitting down outside the main hotel there, looking up at the village, until 5 a.m, chatting with everybody who had played that night.
Yeah, I remember that very well. And it's moments like that I now miss probably more than the actual on-stage moments. It's all the social side of performing.
Yeah.
Which was very important to what we do, because we don't just turn up, do the gig, drive away. It's never been our thing. It's the gig is just a part of a day, and that day, the whole day, has to be a nourishing one. That's the way I look at it. And so those days are the ones I think. Yeah, I'm not missing them yet, but I'm aware that there's a big gap that will be needed to be filled, you know.
Well, it's life, isn't it? I mean, it was all human life was there. Speaking of life, what's it all about? This is a question I'm asking everybody in this series, hoping that one person will suddenly have the answer, have found it. God, life. I mean, really, is this it? What's your take?
I've had a bit of a sea change in the last 5 years. I was very much a materialist atheist. I was the empty page upon which very, very articulate left-wing lecturers wrote a whole Marxist analysis of ideas. You know, ideas do not exist. They're all relative to power, economics, and people justifying power, privilege. So, in other words, there are no truths. There are no universals. Everything is a justification for everything else. And I sort of bought into that rather a lot. So at the same time, I've always been drawn to people of faith. I've always been very impressed by the lives that they lead and the depth of their experience. And then I've walked away thinking, really interesting chap or interesting woman. It's a shame everything they believe is nonsense, though. And so I've always had this funny dichotomy there. And people of faith of all sorts, from high-end C of E people, to Catholics, to Buddhists or whatever, have come up to me and said, "There's something in your music that bears witness to something." And I've always gone, yeah, thanks a lot. And I've always, but in the last 5 years, I've started to think that there's something in stories, there's something in narrative, and it's not important whether it's true or not, whether it actually happened. It's what it tells us about people. I mean, my wife's a Catholic, and we used to argue forever. And I would come out with the old evidence-based arguments, and she would storm off, and nobody felt good. You know, nobody learned anything. And I thought, you know, she leads a certain life informed by certain values, and whether that person ever existed is not important. It's that particular story does something. So I've come round to that way of thinking now. You know, it's like before, Cain and Abel, obviously never happened. No, what does it tell us about a relationship between brothers? Am I my brother's keeper? That is a truth for people as human beings, and it moves us on a bit. And since I've come to that acceptance, I can now plug all of my songs into a universal series of narratives that I feel part of. And they can be religious, they can be myths and legends. I feel part of something in a way that I didn't before, when I was told that all values are related to power and economics, you know. So it's a fascinating time to have this whole conversation about ideas and truths and all that sort of stuff. There's some stories that move us on, and we all progress as a species and leave the world better. And there are some stories that are dark and are damaging, and you have to tread your path, you know, along the right ones. And it almost sounds like a type of religion, but that's what I think it's all about. You know, be a part of the positive stories.
Well, how interesting that you should.
It is religious in a way. It has a timelessness to it. And it makes you, it does, it's quite nourishing, you know, to feel like that.
How interesting at this point in your life, at this time in your life, where really your views should be set in stone, that you should start to think outside that box that you've put around yourself. Was there a moment?
No, it was just a lot of it is just listening to all sorts of people on endless drives through the night. You know, not just Richard Dawkins and the Jordan Petersons and Joe Rogan and all these people that do long form podcasts that challenge you. You know, where it's not an interview or a confrontational studio situation. It's just listening to thinkers. You know, Christopher Hitchens that was 5 or 6 years ago. Endless Christopher Hitchens, and then people that would oppose his very materialistic, anti-religious thing. And driving through the night, you can listen to that stuff for an hour and a half or 2 hours. And that is a new thing, I think. I don't have time to read it, but listening to all that stuff and putting yourself in those sorts of contexts, that's really, I think. And then I could go back to my friends who are, as I say, who have some sort of faith. And I didn't have that same feeling that I knew something that they didn't anymore. You know, we could engage and see each other in a similar context.
Had you grown up with the faith? I mean, were your parents religious in any way?
No, I was brought up sort of lower middle class, C of E, turn up on a Sunday and mumble away, you know. I'd always been drawn to Catholics. I always thought, oh, there's something mystical and rich in that tapestry. But I thought it was total nonsense because obviously there's no such thing as a virgin birth. Obviously there's no such thing as a miracle. But what is important is what those stories say rather than whether they actually occurred. So that's what I'm sort of coming around to, and whether it's it's a good time to be thinking like that because there's so much to think about at the moment.
Yeah, yeah. Well, don't you at times just come to the conclusion that we don't know anything at all?
Yeah, well, I think we should that should be our position, that you know that there are no certainties, there are no truths, and you cannot tell people how to think. You know, you cannot impose your thinking on them. You can just listen to their story and respect it and expect that they do the same back to you, you know.
Well, that sounds very nice, particularly at this moment in time, and particularly on the internet, where wars are raging. It is like a world war going on out there, with people who are so assured of their own viewpoint.
Absolutely.
I mean, that's absolutely fascinating. Has this current global situation inspired any new songs? Will there be a whole album coming out because of it?
I think so. Well, I've got the ride and I'm revisiting the Bristol Slaver. I'm thinking of doing a Lockdown Laments song. I think it's best to let history come to a few conclusions before you really before you really deal with current affairs. You know, AIG was an exception. I mean, an anti-banking song is like shooting ducks in a barrel, isn't it? Or shooting a bucket, whatever it is. But all of this stuff going on, I'm thinking of writing a song called Dark, and it will use as its background the time when Cromwell closed all the theatres. So I'll just go back to history and I'll find some phrases and some expressions and use that as a metaphor maybe. But I've got the time, you know, look, what am I doing today? What am I doing tomorrow, the next day, the day after that, you know?
Well, that was going to be my concluding question, really. Yes, the future, which you've touched on through the whole of our time together here. Do you have a notebook? Do you have a notebook of plans that you're scrolling down in the hope that that might be the one? I mean, where are you and Phil, on, say, the next 2-year plan, 5-year plan?
Well, the first thing is we need, first of all, to start making a living again. So as soon as we're able, as I say, we're going to do all of our albums as discrete shows, maybe in black and white, no microphones, in a nice dark studio, brightly lit faces. So we're looking for an environment to do that. I need to be doing something, so I shall be coming into this room and putting together a series of things. I've been doing some tutorials like cello, mandolin, not lessons, but this is how I play these songs. And I've had a little PayPal link and people have chucked me a £10 or £20 here and there. So that's been ticking over nicely. Whether it's an ongoing way of life, I don't know. My friends, I've just come back from seeing a friend. We've just done a version of the Bristol Slaver. Now, he would have been on tour with the Rolling Stones. He's their keyboard player. That's all off. So he's around for the summer. You know, Mark Tucker, our studio engineer, producer's around for the summer. We're all around, and once social distancing makes it easier to do, we need to be generating music, because I think there's an awful lot of people out there who will want content. You know, they will want stuff to listen to, and they may even more want to know the stories behind things. And as I say, rather than doing gigs at people, I think that is not the way forward. I think that's one strategy that's not going to exist anymore. I saw one particular songwriter was he was after a crowdfunding to help him not have to sell his very, very expensive guitar, you know. It was almost like he couldn't have got it more wrong, you know. Please, this guitar's worth over £3,000. I may have to sell it unless I get some money from you. And someone said, go and drive a fucking van for Tesco. You know what I mean? There's no
I know exactly what you mean. Yes.
That sense of entitlement that you get just because the music is so important to some people doesn't mean that it's as important for everyone else who are facing issues. You know, I think musicians came down the list of the least important members of society at this moment in time, behind people who stack shelves and people who empty bins. And that's exactly as it should be right now. It's a dose of reality for everybody. You know, we are the sort of decoration for people's lives. You know, you know, the guys who empty all the bins and who stack the shelves, they are our current heroes. And in a way, I think that's really good. I don't mind that at all.
Yeah. Yeah. How has your music reached out around the world? I mean, do you find it goes beyond the borders of England? I mean, I have many friends in America who I've introduced to your work, and they adore it, perhaps as only Americans can, in their love of all things English.
Yeah, no, I've noticed looking at the PayPal donations and the comments, people from all over the world sending in a little thank yous and little comments. So, yeah, I think we've captured a certain type of Englishness in the songs that people pick up on. I mean, I enunciate clearly. You don't have to figure out what I'm singing about, and I don't use the abstract very, very rarely. You know, it's a clear sort of narrative. And the melodies are not, you know, we don't modulate and change chords and the keys and all that sort of stuff. It's either there to be liked or no, it's not my cup of tea. So, and even in Holland and Germany, you know, people can pick up the songs and the stories.
Has your enunciation always been there, considering that Dylan was your first inspiration?
I've got some very, very good friends, and it drives me mad that I cannot hear what they're singing. I don't see the point of that. And if they were to play a track to some friends and go, pause, what did I just say? They would be astounded at the number of people go, something about, was it a hill or what was it like that? Everyone needs to know straight away. You've got 4 minutes to make a connection with people. Don't risk not doing it because you're mumbling or you have an odd little pronunciation quirk. You know, overemphasize it. No problem in that.
Steve, it's as ever an absolute joy, and really you will always be on my list, along with the shelf stackers and the garbage removers, as all important in my life. And I thank you and Phil and Miranda and all your merry bands from the bottom of my heart, and especially for today. And I look forward to a happy future. Hearing show of hands, figuring out the direction we should be going in, because I'll be there and look forward to it. Thank you so much, Steve.
An absolute pleasure. I was just going to say, I should have said dustbin men. I don't like using Americanisms for English. They're dustbin men. They're not garbage collectors. I got that wrong. So it's great to you, Tim. Really good.
All the very best, Stephen. And yeah, the garbage man comes naturally to me because I'm married to an American, so that's my excuse. All the very best.
I'll see you on the sidewalk.